Section 23 of the Soul or Rational Psychology. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Travis Bissell. Chapter 14, Part 5 of the Soul or Rational Psychology by Emanuel Swedenborg. Translated by Frank Sewall, 1837 to 1915. And others. Section 23. Prodigality, liberality, contempt of wealth. 237. Prodigality arises from various causes, for a prodigal either desires his ends too much, or he desires none at all, or he regards the present only and not the future, or he denies that riches are a means for attaining ends, or he believes that they produce themselves spontaneously, or he desires to exhibit a generous spirit, or he despises wealth as provocative of evil. Thus, prodigality is both a vice and a virtue. When it is a vice, it is properly called prodigality, but when it is a virtue, liberality, which is a kind of generosity and magnanimity. And when the virtue is supereminent, it is called the contempt of money. Prodigality is of the animus, but not of the natural mind. So it differs altogether from avarice, even as to its origin. That it is of the animus and not of the mind is evident from the genius of the prodigal, for he does not care for the future but for the present, and he lives for the day, or he longs for pleasures of the body too much as ends, and so he indulges his disposition or animus in cupidities alone, or conscious of no burning desire of an end, he is like a dead stock, weakened in mind. Or like boys growing up, he does not know that wealth should be acquired with care as the general means to ends. All these things indicate that the animus is the prodigal and not the mind. Liberality is also either a vice or a virtue, for it is for an end, and the end qualifies the means. It is a vice if it is for loves of the world and the body, and thus for ostentation. It is a virtue if it is for superior loves, as for the works of charity. Thus they regard wealth as mutually received, as committed to their charge, as to be dispensed and returned. The contempt of money, if it is not feigned, is a supereminent virtue, for the contemner turns away from money as he would from the vices and evils to which they are the irritants and perpetual allurements, for the possession of wealth can never be separated from the idea of those delights and pleasures of which it is a means. That which is to be and can be, the mind regards as though present and being. Thus all loves of the world and of the body are worldly and corporeal in the idea as though they were in act. The possession of wealth in this way perpetually irritates and is a universal decoy. And so the mind descends and buries itself in all natural things, worldly and corporeal, from which it is impossible to be elevated to higher things, celestial and divine. If money is despised on this account, such contempt is, as was said, a supereminent virtue. Pity and charity, 238. There are some who are compassionate from nature, some from use, some from purely moral causes, and some from principles of the reason. Compassion from nature, or what is the same thing, from the pure mind and soul, flows forth toward others from an innate love, so that it coincides with love itself, of which it is the first effect. Another form of charity. For love regards another as itself, and so it pities others although it may be deserving of pity itself. Love toward husband or wife, children, blood relations, that is one's own, produces pity, and this charity, which extends itself as far as the love. Love toward society and country, and the more universal love toward the human race, and that which is most universal toward the human race, past and future, a purer and more perfect love than the former, produces a pity, and charity toward all who from this love are spiritually called neighbors, while naturally they are nearer or more remote, since nature alone admits of degree. Thus pity and charity are not joined to self-love and spurious ambition, whence these are virtues of virtues. Such a love cannot be given without its effect. Consequently, from charity and pity, which are effects, it can be judged concerning love, thence concerning the state of the mind and soul. Pity from use emulates pity from nature, for it passes as it were into the natural, since with the passing of time it imbues the mind with the principles of love. This properly is a moral virtue, because it is within the will, not of itself, but of ourselves, to which we contribute as so many instrumental causes through application to the influx of the principal cause. Pity is conceived also from purely moral causes, and is acquired through use, and thus born, it may be, from principles of virtue and piety. But this pity supposes a faith not intellectual, and thus is insinuated from obedience through use, for faith is something that is not in our own power. Pity from the principles of reason, whether from a spurious or legitimate love, is derived from a spurious love, that is, from the love of self. He who is a lover of self is never compassionate, for he does not love others as he loves himself. Nor does he who hates ever pity him who he hates, for no one hates another as another unless he loves himself, that is, unless for causes which oppose his self-love. But notwithstanding, the external works of pity can flow from the principle of this same love of self. So indeed, that one may seem kind, compassionate, and a lover of others, for he knows that it is a virtue, wherefore his self-love stimulates him to appear such and acquire distinction. Or also from the principle that others may pity him if he should happen to be an unfortunate. Then indeed he exercises charity toward those who are wealthy, that he may be rewarded. But this is without pity or love. Pity from principles of legitimate love supposes an intellectual faith, or that from persuasion one knows pity as the effect of pure celestial and spiritual love. The principles of the mind are regarded as so many rational truths, for everyone believes his own principles to be truths. 239. The effect of pity is in the mind anxiety, in the animus sadness, and in the body weeping, and at the same time a pitiful voice. The image of pity also stands out in the countenance. Thus the effects of pity and sadness coincide, but it is such that one suffers as if this sadness were his own, for he whom he pities is his other self. 240. The objects of pity are innumerable. Poverty and unhappiness are general objects. There are also those persons who pity the opulence and celebrity of others, regarding these things as causes of misery and incentives to vices. Everyone pities the avaricious man. There is poverty in worldly, intellectual, and spiritual things. What poverty in worldly things is known. Poverty in intellectual things is ignorance. A hallucination of principles or of opinions concerning truth is silliness and insanity. Poverty in spiritual things is a feeble faith or total want of faith, a cold love or no love whatever of deity, and so no charity from that which is the soul itself of charity. All these kinds of poverty are infelicities. But to judge of poverty and infelicity is of our rational mind, whose choice and application are accordingly various, since there are as many minds as varieties. For with him whom we pity there always intercedes a certain correspondence of principles. Thus this application is not natural but acquired. Fear and dread. 241. Nothing is more natural than to protect life and its essence, and to wish to continue one's being, and to preserve that connection which, by virtue of form, one possesses. The soul, which is living essence, while it is united to the body, furnishes this with sensory organs, that it may be aware of any attempt to destroy it, at each single assault which injures it, and at every disharmony. It is grieved, saddened, altered, and constrained. This alteration is called fear, for in fear the fiber contracts itself and withdraws into itself. It becomes hardened and resists as if senseless. The blood is expelled from the arteries so that the heart palpitates. The animal spirit is expelled from the fibers so that the muscles are deprived of their own motive force, the sensorial organs of their perceptibility. A chilliness and pallor seize the face and limbs. They shiver and shake. The animus, deprived of its own cupidities, falls extinct. In the mind is the image of death. Thus fear is a certain extinction of the mind and animus, and as it were an anticipated death of the body, for its appearance is seen in the body. 242. Since the life of the animus and the life of the mind exist from pure loves, because from affections it follows that we apprehend, we fear or dread the injuring of each and every love, because they are ends of the mind. We fear also every love which is a means to or assists such an injury. Thus all things which bring, as we believe, any deadly hurt. Just so far then as we love the end, do we fear its privation and dread its annihilation. The same is true of the subject in whom is the end, for love cannot be given as an end unless it is in some subject. 243. And so all fear is natural, and it is as great and of the same character as is the love or end which we desire. There are loves both natural and acquired, but whether the love be natural or acquired, nevertheless fear and a departure from nature accompany each when the danger of its extinction or privation threatens. This nature is in the rational mind, to which belong loves, desires, and ends. For whatever the mind does not observe, this it does not fear, and when it does fear, the mind is no more master of itself or competent, but undergoes a kind of swoon. 244. There are as many fears and as many kinds of fear as there are loves and kinds of love. Everyone naturally fears for his own body, whether he loves himself before others or others before himself. The love of preserving the relation between body and soul is innate with everyone. Where there is a relation of dependence of one upon another, there is love. He who loves himself before others also fears more for his own safety than for the safety of others. He who truly loves others more than himself fears more for the safety of others than for his own. Therefore, from fear the quality and degree of love, and what love is known. He who loves his country more than himself considers it glorious to die for his country, or at least for the fame of which this illustrious glory is a part. He who loves his wife and children more than himself suffers death rather than see these loves extinguished. This is also natural to brutes, as in the case of does, stags, hens, geese. For the female boldly confronts the enemy which approaches her young. He who prefers fame to life is fearful of his fame or fears its loss. They are magnanimous who are fearful of the fame of honesty and virtue, whence it follows that fear of the loss of a superior love renders bold the inferior love. He is a hero who fears no loss of the life of the body when fame is endangered, whose loss he would greatly fear. Also the same hero, when his fame is not endangered, fears greatly for his own body, to the end that he may live for fame and for society. 245. He is without reason who prefers the life of his body to the life of his fame, or to honesty, virtue, society, country, and the human race. Yet he is still more contemptible who, like the miser, prefers wealth and similar things to himself and his life. The most timid of all men, he is still an intrepid defender of his treasure, the deprivation of which often leads to suicide. The most despicable and the lowest of all mortals is he who fears nothing for truth, sacred things, heaven, and deity, but only for his own life. Thus fears show of what kind the loves are, and which love is preferred to another. What love is, and what the fear of losing the love of God, the martyrs have testified. Souls which are sublime and elevated above mortal things do not fear to undergo death for truth, especially such as is celestial and divine, because they are fearful for the truth and dread its extinction. But our truths, except such as are divinely revealed, are mere principles of the rational mind. To fear no danger of life or to meet death in defending these denotes indeed a sublime mind, but it may be also an insane one. Such are some of the martyrdoms of heretics and others which historians relate. Fortitude, intrepidity, courage, animosity. 246. Bravery is a heroic virtue, especially in war, and is manifested in battles, combined with intrepidity and magnanimity. There are many kinds of bravery, all of which aim to be regarded as heroic. Common minds think that it is shown only in intrepidity and courage, but a genuine bravery shows itself always more evidently and boldly when the cause is regarded as greater, superior, more universal. And on the other hand, it is more languid where the cause is meaner, inferior, and slighter. The bravery is greatest when intrepidity in the less cause is greater, and in the great cause is less. Insane persons, misers, and others of weak mind, who are terrified by the slightest whisper, also are bold in guarding their treasure, while in a public cause they are quite unnerved at the sight of a drop of blood. 247. Nothing more difficult is known than to discover whether bravery is genuine or false. Genuine bravery, whatever may be the cause, is never turned into fear, but in place of fear into anger, and anger then becomes zeal and a just grievance. False bravery secretly conceals fear. Externally and on the surface it shows the animus, and if it is turned to anger, it is an unjust anger, grief, or fury. Genuine bravery is mild, patient, and clement, even toward enemies, but the false is inflamed and breaks forth into cruelty. Genuine bravery is present in the greatest dangers of life, in the animus and mind, and is the more present and prudent as the perils are greater. Then a false bravery in the animus either melts away or becomes a rage, and the person is insane like one who has lost his mind. He is beside himself, and no longer his own master. Genuine bravery is never united to self-love, but is the inseparable companion of the supreme love of many and of society, with which love it increases. False bravery is from an opposite principle, for an extreme love of self inspires the immortality of fame. But whether it be from a genuine bravery or a spurious one is distinguished by this, that this self-love does not desire these goods of others and of society, but rather that it may seem to all the world to desire them, and thus from the character of the ambition is understood what the bravery is. Genuine bravery is most closely united with humility, adoration, fear, and love of deity. But false bravery is united with pride, haughtiness, hatred, impiety, and with a contempt, hatred, or denial of deity. The greater the bravery is, the greater is the life. The less bravery, the less life there is, even to the condition being comparable to death itself. 248. Intrepidity, which is an attribute of fortitude, is not acquired but is inborn. Hence it appertains to the race and descends to a remote posterity. For the brave beget the brave. It is often a trait belonging naturally to a whole people. For the intrepid does not truly fear the loss or the extinction of that love or that end by which he is led, be it for life, for fame, or for country, but he boldly defends these, since his animus is roused and inflamed at any insults, and the more ardently as he is by nature, the more brave, but at the same time, the more moderately in the degree that danger threatens, inasmuch as the intrepidity of true bravery is conjoined with presence of animus and of mind, and carefully discerns dangers as to their character, and takes counsel in the field, and thus acts either with ardor or with prudence, according to the state and the possibility of peril. But fear, which is the contrary effect and likewise a natural trait, does not rouse and inflame the animus at the presence of peril, but dejects and quenches it. 249. As fear and intrepidity also, since they are both natural traits, are inscribed in the very blood itself, in the spirit of the blood, in their organs, and in the body, so it also follows that intrepidity makes itself seen in the face itself, in the eyes, in the sound of the voice, in the respiration, in the strength of the muscles, and in the actions. Especially it appears from the arteries of the body and the fibers of the brain, which are stronger and more robust in the intrepid than in the timid, since the strength of the whole body is in the arterial blood and animal spirit. This is the reason why we ascribe to the brave a great heart and a great animus, which is a property of the brain. The force of this blood and spirit is excited from the inmosts, that is, from the superior mind or that of the pure intellectory. Hence a presence of animus and a sudden light suffused over the mind, a heat, and as it were a fervor of the blood, strength in the limbs, and a kind of foaming in the cheeks and glands. Such an example of bravery and intrepidity lives in Charles, the hero of the North, in whom it was an inherited trait, since he derived it from his ancestors, from the Charleses and the Gustavuses. He knew not what that was which others called fear, and he laughed at all threats of death. So he lived the life which he is also still to live, far removed from death and superior to the failing life of the body. There is present with such souls a singular providence, because there is something divine in them, and it provides for them a life to which they do not aspire, even one that is immortal in the midst of the mortal. 250. That not all bravery and intrepidity is inborn, but that there is also a kind which is acquired. We see some to be persuaded from the examples afforded in those timid and fearful persons who sometimes act bravely, although not from their nature, but artificially, and from the state of their blood and change of their spirits. For intoxicating drinks, and those aliments of the blood which excite a fervor, even fever itself, mania, and insanities frequently infuse such an animus, and elevate minds to a seeming bravery. But this is not bravery, but rather courage, which is merely in the blood, in the body, on the surface, and in the outermost parts, while still the fear lies hidden within, ready to return whenever this fervor of the blood ceases. From this courage also we may be strengthened in our conviction that bravery and intrepidity are natural gifts. For this courage is not excited in these persons until the nature of the blood and of the spirits is changed, and it ceases with the changing cause, while everything that is natural or inborn, even if violently expelled, nevertheless returns. Their mind is also an inebriated one, rather than a rational mind in which bravery finds its springs. And as soon as fear returns, at the mere idea of the danger already past, the heart palpitates, the blood rushes into the veins, the limbs collapse, and a cold sweat is produced. 251. But indeed, of those possessed of an innate fear, whose mind nevertheless is imbued with the principles of the virtues and with the highest loves, on account of which they vehemently long for a corresponding nature and hate their own which does not answer to these longings, there may be predicated and acquired fortitude, if for the sake of becoming fearless and brave they excite and inebriate the blood by the natural means just mentioned, regarding these as aids in resuscitating the forces naturally languid and torpid. This bravery is the greater moral virtue, in that it comes not into the mind of itself or instinctively, but from a recognition of the truth which one venerates in others outside of oneself and sees to be impossible in oneself except it be actuated by means. For whatever the mind does of itself is a virtue or a vice, but whatever it does not of itself but by nature, this is neither a virtue nor a vice, until the mind has descended to participate in the act. But this acquired bravery neither equals that which is natural, since it is inconstant like the mind itself, which is governed by the principles. End of section 23.